In the early summer of 1714, along the misty shores of the Carolina coast, a vessel of dread emerged from the fog. Known among local sailors as the Crimson Raven, it belonged to a pirate whose name has been swallowed by time. He was a figure of whispered terror, a man whose cunning and ruthlessness extended far beyond ordinary brigands. The pirate's reputation was built not on the gold he plundered, but on the prisoners he claimed. 42 souls who vanished under his command, and whose fate became one of the most haunting mysteries in the early colonies. Witnesses recalled his cold gaze, the calm precision with which he orchestrated raids, and the chilling silence of the ship's decks when he issued orders. It was said that even the wind seemed to hesitate, as if fearing to carry sound across the dark waters he commanded. The story begins with the local fishing villages, sleepy settlements of timbered cabins and winding waterways, where families lived in fragile balance with the sea. The pirate's sudden appearance shattered that peace, a reminder that the ocean could be as unforgiving as it was generous. Boats returning from their morning catch reported shadows on the horizon, sails that appeared without warning, and an ominous stillness that preceded violence. Whispers of the Crimson Raven spread quickly. Every child who dared to peek at the water after dawn, every fisherman who lingered too long along the docks, feared the spectral silhouette that floated closer with every tide. Among those first struck by the pirates' raid was Captain Thomas Ridley, a merchant of modest means whose ship had been caught near a sandbar. Ridley's crew spoke of an eerie calm before the attack. No cries, no cannon fire, only the quiet approach of a dark hull. The pirates' boarding was swift and methodical, a display of calculated terror rather than chaotic plunder. Ridley himself never survived, and his crew was taken shackled below deck. It was here that the horror of the pirates' actions began to unsettle even the most seasoned seamen. 42 prisoners were transported onto his vessel, and from that day forward, none were seen again. Families of the disappeared were left in a limbo of grief, their lives suspended in unanswered questions and rumors that turned into legend. Survivors from other raids described the pirate as unnervingly composed. Unlike other marauders, he did not revel in chaos. He orchestrated it. The decks of his ship were immaculate, and he gave commands with the precision of a general rather than the fury of a bandit. He seemed to understand human fear intimately, using it as a tool to ensure obedience and submission. The silence of his operations became as terrifying as the acts themselves. Sailors who later recounted the event spoke of a soundless terror, footsteps echoing without presence, shadows moving independently of the lanterns, the faint creak of ropes and timbers that heralded the unknown. It was an almost supernatural display, cementing the pirates' legend along the Carolina coast. Reports in port towns chronicled the atmosphere of dread that followed each encounter. Markets emptied as soon as news spread, families barricaded their homes, and watchmen patrolled continuously, though they could offer little defense. The coastal marshes, dense and labyrinthine, were as much an accomplice as they were a barrier. The pirate knew them intimately, slipping through in ways that seemed impossible. The combination of knowledge, cruelty, and cunning elevated him beyond mere outlaw to figure of almost mythic fear. Each incident became a narrative woven into local consciousness, a tale parents shared to warn children, sailors recounted over ale, and clergy referenced as a lesson on divine judgment and human folly. Yet, despite his fearsome reputation, some elements of the pirate's life remained shrouded in mystery. No one knew the origin of his vessel, how he recruited and maintained a loyal crew, or the ultimate fate of the 42 prisoners. Stories diverge. Some suggest the prisoners were marooned on distant islands. Others claim they were victims of ritualistic violence, while others insist they were absorbed into the pirate's ranks, forced to perpetuate his terror. The ambiguity heightened the allure of his story. The very uncertainty became part of the dread. The knowledge that an unseen hand could strike anywhere, that the ocean itself might conceal horrors beyond comprehension, left a lingering tension that pervaded coastal life for decades. As the sun set over the Carolina inlets, families would whisper of flickering lanterns in the fog, of a ship that vanished as mysteriously as it arrived, and of a captain who never spoke louder than necessary, but whose presence alone instilled dread. The pirate's silence, precision, and mastery over fear transformed him from a criminal into an enduring legend. Here, in this tension between the natural world and human malevolence, begins the tale of the Crimson Raven, a story of vanished men, haunted waters, and the kind of terror that does not rely on spectacle but on quiet, calculated horror that lingers long after the waves have receded. In the early 18th century, the Carolina coast was a region defined by contrasts: fertile lands and treacherous waters, prosperous plantations and struggling fishing villages, European settlers and indigenous populations negotiating coexistence and conflict. Life along the inlets and marshes relied heavily on the rhythms of the sea, which could provide sustenance but also deliver sudden devastation. The settlements were scattered, often connected only by narrow dirt paths and waterways, leaving inhabitants vulnerable to both natural and human threats. Local economies depended on trade ships carrying timber, rice, and furs, and the occasional privateer or pirate could dramatically disrupt this fragile balance. The social hierarchy was rigid yet dynamic, influenced by wealth, land ownership, and maritime expertise. Plantation owners wielded considerable influence, while fishermen, laborers, and dock workers navigated a precarious existence. This stratification created a landscape where rumors of danger traveled quickly. A pirate sighting could halt trade, empty markets, and leave entire communities immobilized with fear. The introduction of enslaved Africans into the region added further complexity, as enslaved people provided crucial labor on plantations and in maritime industries, yet lived under constant threat of violence and coercion. The pirate, therefore, did not simply threaten individuals. He threatened the delicate equilibrium of a society structured around both labor and commerce. Maritime law was loosely enforced along these coasts. The Royal Navy maintained a presence, but the sheer length of the coastline, combined with unpredictable weather and shallow inlets, made pursuit difficult. Private vessels often bore arms and traveled in convoys, but even experienced sailors were susceptible to the cunning and precision of a pirate who knew the terrain intimately. The Crimson Raven exploited these conditions, using fog, hidden channels, and tidal patterns to maneuver undetected. Maps were often inaccurate, and local knowledge was fragmented, giving an advantage to those who could read the land and sea like a living document. Cultural beliefs of the period intensified the fear inspired by pirates. Folklore and superstition were deeply embedded in coastal communities. Sailors interpreted natural phenomena, fog, sudden storms, strange currents as omens or warnings. The idea of the sea as a living, sentient force resonated with the unpredictability of life along the Carolina coast. Stories of vanished ships, mysterious disappearances, and inexplicable deaths circulated widely. These narratives became a medium through which communities processed trauma and reinforced social norms. The pirate, therefore, did not simply commit crimes. He became an agent within a cultural narrative that conflated morality, fear, and supernatural speculation. The presence of European powers, primarily England and Spain, introduced further tension. Trade disputes, territorial claims, and alliances with local tribes created a volatile geopolitical environment. Pirates could exploit these rivalries, playing authorities against each other or leveraging political ambiguity to maintain freedom of movement. The Crimson Raven's operations were not mere acts of opportunistic violence, but calculated interventions in a larger social and political framework. He understood that his infamy could be weaponized. Fear itself was a tool as effective as any cannon or blade. Every village along the coast maintained some form of militia or watch system. Farmers, fishermen, and dock workers were called upon to defend their homes, yet training was minimal and resources scarce. Early warning systems relied on watchmen and signal fires, but these were limited in scope. The pirate exploited these vulnerabilities, striking quickly, then vanishing before organized resistance could respond. His strategic awareness extended to psychological manipulation. Communities were conditioned to expect his return, heightening anxiety, disrupting daily life, and undermining confidence in local leadership. Environmental conditions played a significant role in his effectiveness. Marshes, tidal rivers, and dense forests provided concealment and escape routes. Weather patterns, sudden fog, storms, and shifting tides could isolate settlements and make navigation treacherous. The pirate used this knowledge with precision, planning raids when visibility was low and currents favored rapid withdrawal. In doing so, he transformed natural features into instruments of terror, ensuring that fear became inseparable from the landscape itself. The history of the Carolina coast in this era is inseparable from the tension between expansion, settlement, and survival. Economic opportunity, cultural exchange, and community resilience existed alongside vulnerability, violence, and uncertainty. Within this context, the Crimson Raven operated not merely as a criminal, but as a force of systemic disruption. His story cannot be disentangled from the environment that enabled him, the social structures that constrained his victims, or the cultural narratives that preserved his legend. It is a study in how geography, society, and human psychology converge to create conditions in which terror thrives. By understanding the social and historical context, we gain insight into the mechanisms of fear, the vulnerabilities of early colonial settlements, and the interplay between human ambition and environment. The Crimson Raven's raids were not anomalies. They were expressions of systemic fragility amplified by ingenuity and malevolence. In examining these patterns, we see how one figure could command both the seas and the collective imagination, leaving behind a legacy that extended far beyond the immediate acts of violence. The Carolina coast of 1714 was a stage set for legend, and the pirate who vanished with 42 prisoners became its most enduring shadow. The first incident of the Crimson Raven's infamous campaign occurred on a quiet morning near the inlet of Winya Bay. Fishermen had set their nets, unaware of the looming threat when a dark silhouette emerged from the fog. The pirate's approach was silent, almost spectral, his vessel gliding across the water as if floating above it. The crew of local sailors barely had time to react before the boarding party struck, cutting ropes and chains with practiced efficiency. One fisherman, attempting to flee, was struck down with a saber, the blade glinting briefly in the weak sunlight. The suddenness of the attack created a ripple of panic among the small community. As the bodies of the fallen were discovered later, their expressions frozen in terror. The second notable encounter occurred near Cape Fear, where the pirates' meticulous planning became evident. A merchant ship carrying supplies for the inland settlements was intercepted at dusk. The pirate ensured that the tide and wind conspired in his favor, leaving the merchant crew with no avenue of escape. Using grappling hooks and axes, he boarded silently, taking control without the usual chaos of battle. The crew was immobilized by fear. Some collapsed in shock, others attempted resistance, only to be quickly subdued. The pirate collected his prisoners methodically, securing them below deck, while leaving the cargo untouched. This calm, almost ritualistic precision earned him a reputation for combining brutality with an unnerving form of discipline. A subsequent raid near Beaufort involved more than just seizure. It showcased psychological manipulation. The pirate approached under the cover of thick fog, allowing him to remain unseen until he was nearly upon his target. His crew spread false signals of reinforcement, creating an illusion of overwhelming numbers. When the townspeople finally observed the intruders, panic set in immediately. Families attempted to barricade themselves inside homes, but the pirate navigated the settlement with uncanny awareness. He moved deliberately, striking only where resistance existed, ensuring that fear, rather than mere physical injury, dominated the aftermath. Witnesses reported the sounds of splintering wood, muffled cries, and the ghostly silence that followed each measured step. In another chilling instance, the pirate used natural elements as part of his strategy. Near the tidal creeks of the Waccamaw River, he forced villagers into precarious positions, exploiting the unstable marshlands to control movement. Those who attempted flight risked sinking into quicksand-like mud, while others became trapped by low tides, leaving them at the mercy of his calculated boarding procedures. Axes and knives were employed not only to intimidate but to guide his victims into compliance, reinforcing his reputation as a master of orchestrated fear. Observers later recounted the methodical collection of prisoners, the precision with which doors were breached, and the eerie silence maintained throughout, broken only by the occasional instructive shout from the pirate himself. The most terrifying sequence occurred aboard the Crimson Raven itself. Once the prisoners were secured, the pirate implemented what some records describe as a disciplinary demonstration. Those who whispered or murmured were subjected to silent intimidation. Shadows cast by lanterns danced along walls. The creaking of timber exaggerated to unsettle nerves and the subtle movement of blades in hand. The psychological effect was profound. Fear became a tangible presence, shaping behavior and ensuring compliance without overt violence. Survivors spoke of time stretching unnaturally, of the sensation that every heartbeat was magnified, every sound amplified, and every shadow a potential threat. The pirate's understanding of human perception transformed his ship into a chamber of dread. Subsequent raids followed similar patterns, but each carried unique elements of horror. In one coastal village, he used captured livestock as instruments of terror, driving animals through narrow streets to disrupt and disorient residents. In another, he manipulated fires and lanterns to create disorienting light and shadow, heightening panic while minimizing his own exposure. Sails were torn to produce sudden gusts, and ropes strategically swung to create the illusion of phantom movement. Each incident reflected a blend of tactical intelligence and psychological insight, demonstrating that his terror extended beyond immediate physical harm into the realm of prolonged, anticipatory dread. The reactions of the coastal communities after each incident solidified the pirate's terrifying reputation. People spoke of unnatural calm before attacks, whispered warnings of shadows in the fog, and the haunting disappearance of those captured. The loss of 42 prisoners remained particularly ominous, leaving families in permanent suspense. The pirate's ability to vanish as suddenly as he appeared, often without trace, ensured that every sighting induced dread. Local records mention ships found adrift, empty of crew, with no sign of struggle except for disturbed rigging and personal effects, reinforcing the narrative of a predator who operated beyond conventional understanding. Through each incident, the pirate's mastery of fear became evident. He combined environmental knowledge, timing, tactical precision, and psychological manipulation to ensure maximum impact. Communities learned to anticipate his appearances, altering routines and reinforcing vigilance, yet still felt powerless. The sequence of raids along the Carolina coast became a dark ledger of human vulnerability, a testament to how strategy, intellect, and cruelty can combine to create a long-lasting legacy of terror. In every shadow, every fog-shrouded inlet, the memory of his actions remained, a chilling reminder that the unseen can wield more influence than the visible. By analyzing these events collectively, one can observe the pirate's methodical approach to orchestrated terror. Careful selection of targets, strategic use of geography, disciplined crew coordination, and psychological insight. Each raid was not only an act of plunder, but a calculated demonstration of dominance, reinforcing fear as both a tool and an end in itself. The Carolina coast of 1714 was transformed by these actions into a landscape of anxiety and uncertainty, where the line between legend and reality blurred, leaving a haunting imprint on every survivor and observer. The raids carried out by the Crimson Raven sent ripples of fear through every community along the Carolina coast. Families, desperate to protect themselves, fortified homes with hastily assembled barricades, yet even the strongest doors seemed powerless against the pirate's cunning. Local pastors incorporated warnings into sermons, urging moral vigilance as a shield against physical danger, while town councils debated the merits of armed patrols along rivers and marshes. Physicians and midwives recorded symptoms of trauma among survivors, sleeplessness, tremors, and near-hysterical states, documenting what might be called early instances of collective psychological distress. The impact on mental health was profound, as both survivors and those who merely heard tales of the pirate experienced heightened anxiety, paranoia, and fear that persisted long after each encounter. Newspapers and pamphlets of the time reflected a society grappling with incomprehensible violence. Editors chronicled attacks with meticulous detail, often emphasizing the mystery of the pirates' vanishing acts. Local gossip intertwined with printed accounts, creating a layered narrative where fact and legend reinforced one another. Each report of the Crimson Raven's presence heightened public alarm, compelling families to alter routines, delay travel, and relocate temporarily. Merchants delayed shipments, fishermen avoided certain channels, and coastal towns saw a notable decline in trade. Even distant settlements felt indirect repercussions, as the rumor of 42 missing prisoners became symbolic of uncontrollable external threat. Community leaders sought practical solutions, though success was limited. Militia musters were often too small or poorly trained to confront the pirate directly, leaving citizens reliant on personal vigilance and local knowledge of tides, fog, and hidden inlets. Efforts to track or capture him were hampered by the dense forests, labyrinthine marshes, and the shifting patterns of the coastal waterways. Many villagers relied on intuitive strategies, early warning signals, patrols along predictable routes, and alliances with experienced mariners who had glimpsed the pirate firsthand. Yet even with these precautions, encounters remained deadly and unnervingly precise, reinforcing a pervasive sense of helplessness. Psychological interpretations of the pirates' behavior emerged alongside practical measures. Clergy, chroniclers, and observers debated whether the acts were driven by malice, divine retribution, or innate cunning. Some framed the Crimson Raven as a moral warning, a manifestation of human wickedness permitted to test communal virtue. Others suggested supernatural influence, pointing to the pirates' almost preternatural timing and ability to vanish into fog as evidence of dark forces at work. While modern analysis attributes these effects to acute psychological manipulation, contemporary society understood them through the lens of religion, folklore, and cultural superstition. Families of the captured prisoners faced unique burdens. For the 42 individuals taken, no confirmation of survival existed. Letters sent to governing authorities, inquiries to neighboring communities, and organized searches produced nothing but ambiguity. These families navigated grief in an environment where closure was impossible, fostering a collective anxiety that extended into subsequent generations. The societal impact of unresolved disappearance created both emotional trauma and a cautionary framework. Warnings were given to neighbors, stories were told to children, and the specter of the pirate remained embedded in communal memory. The economic ramifications were significant. Coastal trade slowed dramatically as shipping routes were considered unsafe, insurance costs rose, and cargo losses became increasingly common. Town councils allocated funds for watchmen, fortifications, and signal systems, stretching already limited resources. Traders diversified their routes, sometimes exposing themselves to unfamiliar and equally hazardous waters. The Crimson Raven's influence extended beyond physical violence, shaping the economic and social fabric of the Carolina coast in ways that would persist for decades. Even medical practitioners were affected. Physicians noted heightened incidences of stress-related illness, while midwives observed elevated anxiety among women in coastal households. Some attributed physical symptoms, fainting, palpitations, and nightmares to a combination of trauma and exposure to the pirates' reputation. In a time before formalized psychology, communities interpreted these responses through moral and spiritual frameworks, reinforcing the sense that terror was not merely physical, but existential. Fear became a shared, almost tangible presence, influencing behavior, decision-making, and community cohesion. In the newspapers, personal letters, and church records of the time, the recurring theme was control over fear, control over narrative, and the absence of control over life itself. By seizing both people and psychological stability, the Crimson Raven exerted influence far beyond what his numbers alone might suggest. Communities responded with vigilance, moral reflection, and social adjustment, yet none could fully counter the pirate's omnipresent shadow. The mixture of awe, terror, and incomprehension ensured that his legend endured, embedding itself into both local history and folklore. In the collective psyche of the Carolina coast, the pirate's presence became a measure of vulnerability, a constant reminder that survival was as dependent on anticipation as it was on action. Through these reactions, one sees the profound societal and psychological imprint of the pirate. Communities were forced into defensive postures, simultaneously grappling with grief, uncertainty, and the persistent threat of recurrence. The responses, military, economic, social, and spiritual, reveal a society negotiating survival under extreme stress. The combination of direct trauma and persistent uncertainty shaped behaviors, social structures, and cultural memory, illustrating how one individual's actions could reverberate through an entire region, leaving a legacy that transcended immediate events and transformed collective consciousness. The culmination of the Crimson Raven's campaign unfolded on a storm-laden night near Cape Fear, where the coastal villages faced a convergence of nature's fury and human malevolence. Dark clouds hung low, heavy with the promise of rain, and wind-driven waves battered the shore, masking the faint creak of an approaching vessel. Lanterns swung wildly in the hands of watchmen, illuminating fleeting glimpses of sails that seemed to vanish and reappear within the rolling fog. Tension was taut, as every resident feared the imminent arrival of the pirate who had haunted their dreams for months, if not years. As the Crimson Raven drew closer, The village attempted an organized defense, though fear compromised coordination. Families barricaded doors and windows, children clutched parents, and militia units positioned themselves along the shoreline. Yet the pirates' mastery of timing and environmental knowledge rendered preparation almost irrelevant. Using the fog as a natural shield, he maneuvered silently, appearing unexpectedly on multiple fronts, creating the illusion of a force far larger than his actual crew. The first moments of confrontation were chaotic. Shouts rang out, the clash of improvised weapons against blades, the crack of timber breaking under the weight of forced entry. Villagers, desperate and disoriented, struggled to comprehend the spatial manipulation that allowed the pirate to strike and vanish almost simultaneously. Inside homes and along the narrow docks, the Crimson Raven demonstrated both brutality and psychological cunning. He selected victims with precision, neutralizing resistance before it could escalate into open conflict. Axes were swung with calculated arcs, knives gleamed under flickering candlelight, and the echo of struggle reverberated across streets slick with rain. Survivors later recounted the surreal combination of sound and shadow, the sense that every movement was anticipated, every hiding place already known. The pirates' presence transformed familiar spaces into alien landscapes, amplifying terror through anticipation as much as through violence. The capture of prisoners reached a fevered intensity. Individuals were driven through muddy alleys and across flooded streets, guided by the pirates' men whose footsteps were synchronized to maintain relentless pressure. Those attempting escape found themselves ensnared by the environment: deep water, slick mud, and debris acting as natural barriers. The precision of the operation left little room for error, yet every misstep was exploited. Residents witnessed neighbors swept away with an eerie calm, the pirates' demeanor almost ceremonial, as though the act of subjugation itself carried ritual weight. The methodical nature of these abductions contrasted sharply with the chaos surrounding them, creating an atmosphere of controlled horror. As the storm intensified, so too did the pirates' orchestration of fear. Fires were set in strategic locations, their smoke merging with fog to create disorienting visual obscurity. Lanterns were snuffed and relit in rapid succession, shadows dancing along walls and waterways, magnifying perception of movement. Survivors described moments of vertigo, feeling pursued by multiple figures when only a few men were present, a testament to the pirates' manipulation of sight, sound, and timing. By exploiting environmental elements, the Crimson Raven turned natural chaos into a tactical advantage, demonstrating an understanding of human psychology that elevated the terror beyond simple physical threat. A pivotal moment occurred on the main dock, where a group of prisoners attempted to resist. The pirate confronted them directly, his presence commanding both fear and attention. Eyewitnesses recall a brief pause, a silence thick with anticipation, before swift action resumed. Knives flashed, strikes were precise, and the group was subdued without significant noise, maintaining the eerie quiet that had become the pirates' hallmark. The absence of screaming, replaced by the oppressive weight of inevitable capture, intensified the psychological impact on observers. Even those who had not yet been taken understood the futility of resistance, reinforcing the paralyzing effect of the pirates' approach. As the climax unfolded, the interplay between storm and strategy reached its apex. Lightning illuminated fleeting glimpses of the ship, the Crimson Raven himself, and the terrified populace. Thunder masked the subtle sounds of movement. The pirate utilized the terrain docks, alleys, and marshy inlets to channel the flow of villagers and prisoners alike, orchestrating their displacement with surgical precision. Each action was both functional and symbolic. Control exerted over body and environment, fear weaponized as effectively as any blade. The storm itself seemed complicit, wind and rain shaping the battlefield, amplifying the chaos, and shielding the pirates' maneuvers from observation and intervention. By the end of the night, the Crimson Raven vanished as mysteriously as he had arrived. The storm subsided, leaving a landscape of debris, displaced families, and the haunting emptiness of missing neighbors. Villagers, though physically unharmed, were mentally fractured. Every step, every shadow, and every whisper of wind became a potential threat in the collective memory. The culmination of his campaign was not measured solely in captives or damage, but in the enduring psychological imprint on a society that had faced calculated, immersive terror. The pirate had not merely raided, He had transformed perception itself, ensuring that fear remained long after the physical threat receded. The aftermath cemented the Crimson Raven's legend. Survivors' accounts were recorded, though inevitably interwoven with exaggeration and fear-induced distortion. Subsequent generations inherited stories of this night, perpetuating a cycle of anticipation, anxiety, and myth. Scholars examining the period note that the interplay of environmental manipulation, psychological insight, and tactical precision exemplifies how fear can be structured, sustained, and amplified, leaving an indelible mark on both historical record and cultural consciousness. The climax of 1714 was not just an event, it was a masterclass in the orchestration of terror, a haunting reminder of how one figure could dominate both land and mind through calculated strategy and ruthless execution. The disappearance of the Crimson Raven and his 42 prisoners left an enduring void along the Carolina coast, one that persisted far beyond the immediate events of 1714. Families remained in perpetual uncertainty, unable to mourn or recover their loved ones, caught between hope and the terrifying possibility that the missing had been permanently lost. This unresolved absence created a culture of anxiety, where every foggy inlet and moonlit shoreline carried the weight of speculation. Rumors flourished. Some whispered that the pirate had been granted supernatural powers, that he moved between worlds, or that he had struck a secret pact with the sea itself. Others insisted that he had simply vanished with his captives, leaving them to an unknown fate that would forever haunt the memories of those left behind. Communities adapted to life under the shadow of legend. Coastal towns strengthened social bonds, shared information more rigorously, and developed informal alert systems to anticipate future raids. Yet these adaptations were always tinged with fear. Schools, churches, and markets, once bustling, were imbued with an unspoken awareness that danger could arrive without warning. Stories of the Crimson Raven were told repeatedly, each telling reinforcing both fear and fascination, ensuring that the pirate's psychological imprint transcended the limits of personal experience. The collective consciousness became a repository for dread, myth, and moral caution, blending tangible history with narrative invention. Speculation about the fate of the prisoners took various forms. Some claimed the captives were hidden in secret coastal caves, while others theorized that they had been absorbed into pirate life, adapting or perishing as part of a shadowy maritime existence. Scholars examining early colonial records suggest that a combination of fear, geography, and incomplete documentation rendered any conclusive account impossible. The mystery of the vanished individuals became a lens through which historians, folklorists, and psychologists examined the intersection of trauma, memory, and narrative construction. Survivors' recollections were often fragmented, shaped by panic, suggestion, and the human tendency to embellish in the face of incomprehensible events. The ripple effects of the pirates' campaign extended into cultural consciousness. Artists, storytellers, and chroniclers drew upon the terror he induced, embedding motifs of fog, shadow, and sudden disappearance into local legends. Maritime practices were altered, with sailors adjusting routes and vigilance procedures in response to tales of the Raven's strikes. Local economies adapted to perceived threats, reflecting an ongoing negotiation between survival and commerce. In essence, the pirates' actions became a catalyst for social evolution, illustrating how extreme events can accelerate behavioral adaptation while simultaneously embedding mythic resonance. Psychologically, the prolonged uncertainty shaped entire generations. Children grew up with cautionary tales emphasizing vigilance and the omnipresence of danger. Adults internalized collective trauma, translating fear into rigid routines and communal rituals. Chroniclers of the time observed heightened alertness, social cohesion reinforced through mutual protection, and the lingering effects of acute stress among those who had witnessed or narrowly escaped attacks. The psychological imprint of the Crimson Raven mirrored what modern researchers describe as collective trauma, highlighting the profound and enduring influence of unresolved fear on societal structure and individual behavior. Medical and scholarly accounts from the period offer insight into the physical manifestations of stress induced by repeated terror. Reports included fainting, insomnia, palpitations, and nightmares, reflecting the pervasive anxiety among communities perpetually anticipating attack. While contemporary understanding lacked a framework for psychological trauma, The meticulous recording of symptoms suggests early recognition of the interplay between environmental threat, chronic stress, and human vulnerability. The Ravens campaign, therefore, was not only a series of violent episodes, but also an unintentional study of human response to sustained psychological pressure. Even centuries later, the legend persists. Researchers, historians, and enthusiasts explore coastal archives and oral traditions, attempting to untangle myth from reality. Maritime archaeologists have sought the Crimson Raven's ship, and genealogists trace potential descendants of the lost prisoners. Yet the precise truth remains elusive, reinforcing the story's enduring fascination. The blend of historical record, human psychology, and maritime enigma ensures that each retelling carries both educational insight and visceral suspense. Ultimately, the story of the Crimson Raven serves as a meditation on fear, uncertainty, and the human capacity to endure the unknown. His disappearance, coupled with the unresolved fate of the prisoners, leaves a space for reflection. How societies interpret loss, how legends arise from terror, and how memory preserves both factual and mythic elements. The Carolina coast of 1714 became more than a geographic location. It transformed into a symbol of the intersection between history, narrative, and human vulnerability. In this reflective space, the haunting presence of the pirate endures, a reminder that the most lasting shadows are often those cast by uncertainty, mystery, and the human imagination itself.